It is the turning point of everything in Genesis 3. Everything from here on out points to redemption in Genesis chapter 3. We're going to look at the doctrine of sin tonight, and also the doctrine of Satan.
Did we do chapter 2?
Huh?
Did we do chapter 2?
Yeah, we done chapter 2 last week.
I'm wrong on notes.
That's okay.
We just...
No.
We
We didn't finish chapter 2. We didn't finish chapter 2, no.
got to verse 18.
Yeah, we got to verse 18. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. We'll get through this quickly. It's been a week for me. And the Lord God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helpmate or a helpmeet for him." All right. Now, we've been taught all of our lives that a woman has an extra rib than a man. That's not true. Right, Sarah? Ain't you a nurse? All right. And out of the ground, God, and we looked at this last week, and out of the ground God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air and brought them into Adam. This is really interesting. I want you to look. And out of the ground, the Lord formed every beast. Now it says out of the ground, but how is man made? Out of the ground, but what comes off the ground that we was made from? The dust. Okay, so that separates us there, first of all, from the animals. They were made from the ground, we were made from the dust of the ground. And it says, "And out of the ground the Lord formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air and brought them into Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called the living creatures, that was the name thereof." How he come up with dog, cat, monkey, whatever, we have no idea. But you have to get it in mind, and I want you to look at this. And God brought them to Adam. Adam did not have to venture out to find these animals. They were brought to him. It's kind of reminiscent of what Noah does with the ark, right? Does Noah go out and scour the earth for animals? They come to him, right? So far in chapter 2, we're going to learn that in chapter 2, and also when we start studying the Noah flood, that there is one element two elements that always obeys God. It is nature and animals, environment and animals. They always obey God. And we're going to see tonight in chapter 3 what rebels against God. And Adam gave names to all the cattle and all the fowl, to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was found no helpmeet for him. Okay? This is how woman is brought about. And the Lord caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep, or to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he takes one of his ribs, and he closed up the flesh instead thereof. You'll notice that the rib is located in the middle of your body, right? Does he take it from the head or the foot? Why do you think he takes it from the rib?
Beside the man instead of over or under.
Good deal. All right, beside a helpmeet, somebody to help, okay? And it says, "And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he woman, and brought her unto him." So she is, like you say, she is beside him. She's not above or below. She is a helpmeet for Adam. That is like what Christ is for the church and what the church is for Christ. We help. We do not do it, but we help bring people into the body of Christ by how? Witnessing, testifying. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." Y'all know the joke, right? How you come up with woman. First time he said, he went, "Whoa, man." So, all right.
And later he says, "Whoa."
Yeah. So see, here's your comedy relief there for tonight. Now this is very important. "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall become one flesh." That is the first mention, even before we have Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and Seth and all of them, and you have the people drifting apart. That is the first mention of home, of a home life. The first mention is not church. The first mention is home. When a man leaves his mom and his dad, and the woman leaves mom and dad, they are going to form a home. And that is where it all begins. And we've often talked about Satan does not destroy the church first. He destroys the home first. And if he can destroy the home, and it is a domino effect all through society. Okay? The home is destroyed first. So that is the first mention, or the first symbolic mention of home. And then it comes to verse 25. And this is very interesting. I want you to look at the end of what did God, when God looked at everything He created, how did He describe it? Good. And then He describes it as what? Very good. All right? Now, when you get to the latter part of chapter 2, verse 25, it says, "They were both naked, and the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed." So you have good, very good, and not ashamed. So far in chapter 1 and also in chapter 2, how would you describe Adam and Eve's society, or their life, or their place that they live at? Would it be perfect? Good, perfect, everything's great. Nothing wrong, correct? Now, you have Adam and you have Eve. They're happy, they're unashamed, everything is great, everything is wonderful. And we said this last week, if you were to take out chapter 3 and then start looking at chapter 4, something dramatic happens, doesn't it? There is a massive change that happens in chapter 3. Now, in my opinion, they're the two most important chapters in the Scriptures is the fall of man and the redemption of man. The fall of man comes of course, in chapter 3. And then the redemption of man is told in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then Paul writes about it all through his epistles. So the fall of man, but then the redemption of man. So there is a massive shift change that is going to happen in chapter 3. All problems that we face today can be traced back to chapter 3. All right? There is an original sin. There is a first sin. Genesis is the first of everything. Up until chapter 3, there's no sadness, there's no problems, there's no pain, there's no trouble, there's no death, there's no evil, there's no nothing, there's no lying, there's no covetousness, jealousy, nothing. Everything's great. You've got Adam, you've got Eve living in this utopia society somewhere with their garden and their animals, and everything's great. Okay? But then we come to chapter 3. And then everything turns backwards. Okay? And I want to kind of explain it to you. From chapter 4, let me look. From chapter 3, verse 21, all the way through Revelations, the last chapter and last verse in Revelations, it is one story and one story only. It is the story of redemption. Okay? From chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis, it is the story of creation. Chapter 3, it is the fall that is dedicated to one chapter, but the rest of the chapters of the Bible and the rest of the books of the Bible are the story of redemption. It takes one chapter or one verse to totally change everything. Okay? Now, the question is, before Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, did God know that this was going to happen? Okay? That is what we call providence of God. He knows what's going to happen. Before Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, He knows that He is going to have to send a redeemer or a near kinsman. Okay? He knew that. Before chapter 3, there is no death. There is nothing. It is a perfect environment. Now, in chapter 3, just raise your hand if you've ever heard of the original sin or original sin. Okay, some of you have, some of you have. The original sin is going to take place in chapter 3, and it is going to be passed along to us. If you look in the book of Romans chapter 5, and maybe we'll get into this tonight. In Romans chapter 5, everything that Adam does in chapter 3 is passed along to us. Danny and Chris, does not have anything of mine except their good looks. That's it. They get their smarts from their mom. They get everything. Danny Lynn gets her left-handedness from me. They got very little. But they do have some trace of me in them. But I passed my genes along to them. Spiritually, what Adam did in the garden is passed along to us. Okay? It is imputed unto us. You can find that in Romans chapter 5. We don't have time to look at it. Look in verse 12. I lied. Romans 5:12. Wherefore, as by one man, who is that one individual? Adam. By one man, sin entered into the world. Because of one individual, sin entered into the world. Alright? And death by sin. And so death passed upon who? Everybody. The reason there's a cemetery across the road is because of sin. The reason you get sick, the reason there's disease, the reason there's heartache, the reason there's everything wrong in this world can be traced back to Genesis chapter 3. You know, I've done a lot of things in my life. I've messed up a lot of things in my life. But I have never caused generations I have never passed anything like this along. Adam is responsible for the condition we are in now. Alright? But, thank God that through one man, redemption is passed along. And who is that one individual? So you see how you have the first Adam and you have the second Adam. The first Adam passed along sin and death to us. The second Adam passes along redemption, salvation to us. Okay? That's how that works. Now, the word sin does not appear in chapter 3. It appears in chapter 4. Do you remember when God is talking to Cain, he says that your countenance, that sin is lying at your door. We don't have the word sin there. We don't have the word fall. So how do we know that something dramatic has taken place? I'm going to walk you through this. Now, I doubt we get into the thing tonight, or to the lesson. In chapter 3, after everything happens, there is a dramatic shift. Look with me. In chapter 3, verse 7, and you can write these down. It's going to take us a while to go through these, and I do apologize, but I want to kind of get to show you how massive this is. This three-letter word sin, and how it has changed everything. Chapter 3, verse 7. We'll go back and look at these more in depth maybe week after. And the eyes of them were both opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. But in chapter 2, verse 25, what did they didn't realize that, did they? So you see how already sin is already starting to take place. If you go to verse 8. And when they heard the voice of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day, Adam and his wife, before this, what would they have done? Would they have hid themselves? No. What are they doing now? They're hiding themselves. Do you see how this is starting to take place? It says they hide themselves from the presence of the Lord amongst the trees of the gardens. Go to verse 10. Now remember, everything we've talked about in chapter 1 and 2, perfect environment. Adam and Eve sin, they fall, and you'll see the domino effect of it. In verse 12, in verse 10, this is what Adam says. And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, but I was afraid. In chapter 1 and 2, was he afraid? He's never afraid of him up until then. And then he says, because I was naked, and I hid myself. And God asked him a question, how do you know he was naked? Because his mind has been opened, his eyes have been opened, right? Go to verse 12. And he said, the woman that thou gavest me. Notice who he starts pointing the finger at. He no longer takes responsibility. Do you know we still have that problem today? The one thing I like about King David, and I've mentioned this story several times about David and Bathsheba. Do you know who David blames that with? Himself. He takes full responsibility. He says, I have sinned. And you remember Nathan says you're not going to die. David takes full responsibility. But in the society that we live in, and it's been like this since Genesis chapter 3, verse 12. Who does man like to blame? Everybody else. I think Shakespeare said that men are sometimes masters of their own fates. We blame It's his fault. It's his fault. It's his fault. Mom didn't hold me enough. Dad didn't get me the Red Ryder BB gun for Christmas. That's why I robbed a bank. This is why it's always everybody else's fault. But the thing is, it says, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. It's been like this. Is nothing new. It's always been like this. Go to verse 13. He says, if you hadn't gave me that woman, and she hadn't went to that tree and gave me that whatever, I wouldn't be in the shape I'm in, God. So guess whose fault it is? Yours. Look in verse 13. And the Lord God said unto the woman, what is it that thou hast done? And the woman said, the serpent. No, now whose fault is it? Satan's. That's where we get the cliche, the devil made me what? Do it. Okay? And I did eat. Go to chapter 3, verse 24. And we're going to show you how this eventually starts getting worse and worse. And it starts off, and you'll notice it starts off where their eyes are open and they realize that something is not like it was. And then they start hearing the God's voice, and what do? They run and hide because they're afraid of Him. Now, go to chapter 3, verse 24. And so he drove. That means you take a stick. In the Hebrew, that is like an ox goad. You remember when Christ or God told Paul, why are you kicking against, what that basically is a stick. We call them shockers now. Those of you got the cows, you got that shocking stick. That is what God is having to do. They didn't want to leave the garden. He's having to drive them out. Get out, move, leave. They're wanting to do everything in their power to stay where they're at. Okay? So what God is doing in verse 24, chapter 3, is He is driving out the man. He is literally, it's like a man that goes and repossesses a house. Everything's thrown out in the front yard. You've got to go. So God is moving and He is driving out man. And He placed at the east end of the garden cherubims with flaming swords and to keep them away from the tree of life. We'll go over that maybe week after next. So you see, it started off with hiding from God. And now it has got to the point in chapter 3, the last part of chapter 2, everything's great. In chapter 1, everything's good. Chapter 2, they're not ashamed. Everything's perfect. Then you get to the end of chapter 3, what's God's doing? He's kicking them out of the garden. And you know why? Because of sin. Go to verse 4, chapter 4, verse 8. And Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and I promise we'll go back over all these. I just wanted to kind of show you the progression of this. And Cain talked with Abel, his brother. And it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and he slew him. First murder. It went from hiding from God to what? Now we've went to murder. Okay? Go to chapter 4, verse 19. And Lamech took him 2 wives. When God originally did this, who did He say, Adam, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of wives? How many did He make for Adam? 1. Now we are into polygamy. More than 1 wife. In chapter 4. Then you get to chapter 4, verse 23, and look what Lamech says. And Lamech said unto his wives, plural, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. Now we have 3 murders, don't we? First we have Cain and Abel. Then we have Lamech. He has killed somebody. He's killed somebody else. You see how the progression has gone. Go to chapter 6, verse 5. The chapters in between that are going to be your generations. And chapter 6, verse 5, I want you to look. God saw that the wickedness of man was gigantic, great, humongous. God, when He made man, what did He say? After He made Adam and Eve, He looked at them and said, man, this is great. This is very good. Absolutely amazing. Now we got God running them out of the garden. Now we got Cain killing Abel. Now we got Lamech. He's got more than 1 wife. Now we got Lamech. He's going around killing folks. And now we come to chapter 6, verse 5. God sees the wickedness in man. It's great. See how it's changed? All because of chapter 3. He said, I saw there was great in the earth, and that every bit of it, 100%, to the brim, plumb full. Everything that man thought about in his heart was on what? Evil. Everything that he did was evil. What happened to the very good? Well, I mean, where'd that go? It's gone. That was wiped away in chapter 3. All right? And this is something that the Jews believe. The Jews believe that they don't believe in an original sin or total depravity. They believe that that sin that Adam and Eve committed stayed with them, with their two. And what the Jews believe, and what the Jews could not kind of get over with original sin or total depravity, they thought, Jews believe when you're born, you got a clean slate. It's like this blackboard. All right? And every time you sin, God says, up, there's one. Up, there's two. But when you're born, it's not like that. It's all clean. But when we're born, we don't have a solid white blackboard. It's all black, isn't it? Because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And what the blood and what the cross does, if all of this is black, God is the eraser, and He erases this to make it what color? White. So that is how everything has happened. He sees the wickedness of man in verse 5. It's on it continually. Go to verse 11. And the earth was also, every bit of it, all of it, was corrupt. Every place you went was corrupt. There was no such thing as you go to that neighborhood and it's a great place, but you stay across railroad tracks. Everything in the world at this time was totally corrupt. And it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Original sin. And the earth was filled with violence. So now, the imagination, everything that man has, is evil. And then we get to verse 11, the earth and everything was filled with violence. There is nothing happening good on the earth. See what a change that has? Go to verse 12, and God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Whose way? No, corrupted man's way. Do you remember in the book of Judges, the last part of the book of Judges, it said that every man did what was right in his own sight. That's what's wrong with society. We don't like to go with what God says is right and God says is wrong. Go to chapter 7, verse 23. Now, I know I'm pointing out all the bad things, but I promise there's a whole bunch of good stuff in Genesis. We'll look at that also. Chapter 7, verse 23. God is going to start over. All right? Start all over. And every living substance, according to chapter 7, verse 23, everything was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man, woman, boys, girls, everything. Except for Noah, his wife, and his kids. Everything was destroyed from the earth. Only Noah remained alive, and that were with him in the ark. Everything was gone. Violence is wiped out. Everything's gone. So you only are dealing with just a handful of people now. But guess what? The sin is still there. Although God completely washed the earth away of everybody, there's one thing He didn't wash away. You know what it is? Sin. It's still there. And I can prove it. Go to chapter 9, verse 21 through 25. Now, there's a lot of discussion about what happens in these verses. And we will get into them in the next several months in depth. As soon as God wipes out everybody on the earth and He saves Noah's wife and his kids, Ham, Shem, Japheth, and their kids. All right? The first thing that happens when Noah gets off the boat is Noah plants him a vineyard, and guess what happens? He gets drunk. Wait a minute. It was good in chapter 2 and very good, and everything was great, and they were unashamed. So we get to chapter 3, they have the sin, and everything just goes to pot. So what God's going to do is wipe out every living creature, and He's going to save a few. So why hasn't man learned his lesson? Because we're sinful. As soon as Noah gets off the boat, plants him a vineyard, and it tells us, and he drank the wine, and he was a drunk. Everybody in here, we come from one person. Do you know what we come from? A drunk. That's the truth. And it says, and he drank wine, and he was drunk, and he was uncovered within his tent. We will go over what a lot of people think that is or doesn't, we're not going to tonight. So his kids, Ham, Shem, Japheth, come in, and we have in verse 25, and he cursed. He put a curse on them. Well, you know how many people you have on earth at this time? Yeah, Ham, Shem, Japheth, and their wives, and Noah and his wife. 10? I don't know, I can't count. And it's still the same. How much worse is it now that we've got a few billion people on earth? All right, go to, it gets gooder. Go to chapter 11, verse 7. The whole earth is filled with one language. They decide we're going to build us a tower up to God. We're going to be like God. Okay? So God comes down and he confounds their language that they might understand one another's speech. And now that one sin was kind of contained in one place, right? At the Tower of Babel. Everybody's at one place. What did God tell them to do? He told Adam, told Noah, be fruitful, multiply, move, get out. And by scattering them in verse 8, do you know what else is scattered? Sin. You had it contained for a little bit, but now they scatter, and with sin it scatters. Cancer, I hate that word. I hate the C word. You know what makes cancer so deadly? It's not the fact that it stays in one place. The fact it spreads. If it stayed in one little place, they could nip it, get rid of it. What makes cancer so bad is it spreads. What makes sin so bad is it spreads. What made leprosy so bad is it spread. Go to, y'all probably now depressed, aren't you? Go to chapter 12. There's a lot of good stuff, I promise. Just go to chapter 12, 11 and 12. You remember when there was a big famine in Egypt? Famine in the land in verse 10. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt. Abraham, the father of the Hebrews, father of the Jews, to sojourn there. And the famine was grievous in the land, and it came to pass when he came near Egypt, he said unto Sarah his wife, behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to tell them that you're my sister. What is he doing? He's lying. Now go to 13:7. Got Abraham and Lot. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abraham's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. So now you have strife. And then you go to chapter 13, verse 10. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and behold, the plain of Jordan that was all well watered everywhere, and before the Lord destroyed, wow, Sodom and Gomorrah. Getting a lot worse, isn't it? Wait a minute, God destroyed the earth and got rid of the people. And get rid of sin. And we'll continue on. In chapter 14, I'll run out of time. Chapter 14, you have the very first war. And you can read about that with all the kings. Chapter 16, verse 4. And he went unto Hagar, Abraham. And she went into Hagar, and she conceived. What is he committing? Adultery. All right? You see how sin affects everybody, even the father of the Jews, Abraham. Go to chapter 8. Chapter 18 is just a muck. I mean, everything goes wrong with chapter 18 and then chapter 19. All right? So because in chapter 18 you have Sodom and Gomorrah. Chapter 19 you have Sodom and Gomorrah. Chapter 19 you have the angels in there, and then you have these men pressing hard upon the door, and they're trying to get into these angels, and Lot takes his wife, don't look back, she turns into salt, they leave some of the kids there. Lot ends up at the end part of chapter 19 in a cave with his two daughters. They get him drunk, they have sex with him, and then they have a race of people that is in contention with the Jews all throughout the Old Testament. And we can all trace that back to what chapter? 3. Go to, man, I didn't know I had this much. Go to chapter 20. I'm trying to get through, guys, I promise. Go to chapter 20, verse 1 and 2. And Abraham journeyed thence toward the south country, and dwelt in Kadesh and Shur, and sojourned unto Gerar. And Abraham said unto his wife, guess what? You're going to be my sister again. What is he still doing? He's lying. All right, go to let's knock these out. Chapter 21, you have Hagar and Ishmael, the cruelty there. You have the first concubine, chapter 22, verse 24. You also have a famine. You also have lying in chapter 26. Chapter 27 is a biggie. You have the stolen blessing from Isaac with the help of who? Rebekah. All right, and then in chapter 29 you have deception. Chapter 30 you have anger, you have adultery, you have polygamy. Chapter 31, deception. Chapter 31, deception and a stiff-necked people. Chapter 32, you have hatred. Chapter 34, chapter 35 are two of the craziest chapters in the whole Bible. Y'all know what happens there? In chapter 33, chapter 34, let me see if I can get it. In chapter 34, Dinah was a daughter of Leah. And she goes into this city. And the king's son rapes her. But he falls in love with her. So then you have Levi and another brother, I can't think of who it is right now. They're going to get back at the whole city. So what they tell them is like, listen, we got a lot of good-looking Jewish women that I know y'all want to marry. If you'll circumcise yourself, we'll let you marry them. They circumcised themselves, and it says when they were still sore, Levi and one of his brothers goes in and they murder everybody in the city. So you went from very good in chapter 2 to a whole city being destroyed. And then you get to chapter 35, you have idolatry. Chapter 37, you have Joseph being sold into slavery. Chapter 38, you have incest. And it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And then when you get to 2017, you got a guy that goes into a church with a gun, kills a whole bunch of people. You got kids going into schools with a gun, killing a whole bunch of people. And it starts with a serpent named Satan looking at Eve and going, let's discuss the character of God because you got him all wrong. He's lying to you. Do you see how that one, it's the smallest of words, isn't it? 3 letters. The smallest of words. And look what it has got us into. And when we had kids, not only did we pass down our genes to them, we passed down our sin to them. And if they get married and have kids, guess what we're going to pass down? Their sin. And it's on, and it's on, and it's on. That is why, starting in, I believe I said verse 21 of chapter 3, onward, it's just a story of redemption. It has to be the story of redemption. The thing about sin, we're not going to get through, and I do apologize. The thing about sin is this. There is no human cure for it at all. You cannot cure it with money, with sex, with alcohol, with drugs, with counseling, rehabilitation. It cannot be cured. There's no human cure for sin. Even though we are followers of Christ, even though we are saved, even though we are takers up of crosses, we are still a sinful people. Even the Apostle Paul says there's 2 things going on inside my body. What I want to do, I don't do it. What I don't want to do, that's what I do. One day, the reason there has to be a new heaven and a new earth found in the book of Revelations is because everything I just read you, it has to be something new to come along. One day it is going to be back to very good, not being cast out of the garden. So as we go through this, especially in chapter 3, as we go through this, it all boils down to, it was Eve's fault. No, I'm kidding. It all boils down to one thing. When you start questioning the character of God, and that's what happens, the Satan looks at Eve and says, did he really say that? No, he didn't say that, did he? Well, no, this is not no. When you start judging his character, and you start thinking, well, he's not quite as holy as the Bible claims, or he doesn't quite look upon sin as hard as he does. When you start judging that, when you start putting God's character on trial, everything falls apart. And it all falls apart, and it starts in the home. It was Adam and Eve in a Southern Baptist church when everything fell apart. Their home was the garden. It all starts at the house. Every bit of it. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you and we thank you. We thank you, dear God, that there is a redemption story. And we thank you, dear God, that story one day, dear God, there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and we won't have to worry about sin and corruption. Dear God, we ask that as we study this, that you'll open our minds and that you'll open our hearts. And dear God, let us examine ourselves to see where we stand with you. We ask you, dear God, just to be with the prayer requests that we have heard tonight. Be with the ones that show up ever so faithful. We love you, dear God, because you first loved us. In your name we pray. Amen.